Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to getting truly well informed on the topics really shaping our world. Today, we're diving into something, well, it's revolutionary, no doubt, but also a bit of a maze, artificial intelligence, specifically large language models or LLMs. Their power is just immense, but beneath that surface, there's this really complex labyrinth of privacy challenges, and we're going to try and navigate that labyrinth together today. For this deep dive, we've pulled together insights from some really key sources. We're leaning heavily on the European Data Protection Board's report, the one on AI privacy risks and mitigations for LLMs. Also, a really eye-opening analysis from the Future of Privacy Forum, their white paper, Data Minimization Substantive Turn. Very interesting. And we're bringing in some practical perspectives, too, on zero-trust data protection, drawing from folks like Lightbeam and Logicalis. So it's a mix, legal, technical, strategic thinking all rolled into one.
Yeah, and our mission for you today really is to equip you with a more nuanced understanding of this intersection. How data privacy and security aren't just afterthoughts in AI development. They're absolutely foundational pillars. We want to cut through that complexity and show you what's really at stake and how to think about safeguarding personal data in this space that's just changing so fast.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What exactly are large language models, and why are they suddenly such a big deal for privacy?
Right. So at their core, LLMs are these advanced deep learning models. They're incredibly good at processing and generating language that sounds, well, human-like. Think of them as super sophisticated pattern recognition engines, but for text. They learn from just massive amounts of data, often using what are called transformer architectures that helps them understand context. Models like OpenAI's GPT series, Google's BERT. They're getting remarkably good. Sometimes you can hardly tell you're not talking to a person.
And that sounding human part, that's exactly where it gets tricky for privacy, isn't it? Because these aren't just brains in a jar, so to speak. They're part of something bigger.
Exactly. That's a crucial distinction. LLMs rarely operate in isolation. They're almost always components inside larger LLM-based systems or AI systems. And this matters because the whole system, the user interface, the databases it connects to, other integrations of that complete system carries inherently more privacy risks than just the model itself. It's the whole ecosystem we need to watch, really, from the second you type something in to the answer you get back and everything happening under the hood.
Right. So it's not just the AI brain, but the whole digital body, the whole setup. The European Data Protection Board really hammers this home, looking at the entire AI system lifecycle. It's similar to standards like ISO IEC 22989. You can picture it like a continuous journey, right? From the very beginning, the inception, through design, development, testing, validation, deployment, running it, monitoring it, and eventually phasing it out, retirement. And the kind of surprising or maybe scary part is that privacy risks, they can pop up at every single step along that way.
That's absolutely right. And if you look closer, the risks manifest in some really specific ways. Take the very start. User input. You as a user might accidentally or maybe unknowingly feed sensitive personal data into the system. Think financial details, medical info, things you wouldn't want exposed. And if that interface isn't properly secured, well, that data could be vulnerable. Then there's transparency, or the lack of it. Do you really know how your input is being used or stored? And we haven't even touched on adversarial attacks yet. Things like prompt injection, basically tricking the AI with a clever question to make it spit out something it shouldn't.
Or jailbreaking, right? Trying to bypass its built-in safety rules.
Exactly. It becomes this constant cat and mouse game between developers trying to secure it and others trying to break it.
Okay, so that's just getting the data into the labyrinth. What happens once it's moving through the AI's internal pathways?
Well, then you've got risks at the provider interface and API level. If the data isn't encrypted properly while it's traveling to the provider's servers, someone could potentially intercept it, snooping, basically. Or if the APIs themselves, the digital doorways, aren't secure, attackers could exploit those vulnerabilities to gain unauthorized access.
Okay, so data in transit is one thing. What about once it actually reaches the provider where the LLM is doing its thinking?
Right, LLM processing at the provider's infrastructure. This gets even more complex. The LLM itself might inadvertently infer sensitive information. It might piece together clues from seemingly harmless data you provided. We also see big concerns around providers potentially logging sensitive data, maybe for debugging or trying to improve the model, but without really getting proper explicit consent. And here's a kicker. If those logs, containing potentially sensitive user inputs, are then used to retrain the model, that opens the door to data poisoning, where malicious actors could intentionally feed bad data into those logs to corrupt the model later on.
Wow, okay. So many potential pitfalls before we even get an answer back. What about the output itself? once the AI generates a response?
Even the processed output isn't risk-free. The model might hallucinate, which is the term for when it confidently makes up incorrect or misleading information.
Yeah, I've seen examples of that. It sounds convincing, but it's just wrong.
Exactly. Or it could inadvertently reveal sensitive details it learned during training or inferred from your query. There's also a risk of re-identification. The output, combined with other knowledge, might unintentionally reveal who made the query. And of course, the output could simply be misused by malicious actors or third parties once it's generated.
And I imagine some situations make all this even riskier.
Oh, definitely. Certain conditions really amplify these risks. If you're processing sensitive categories of data health, finance, biometrics, or handling just massive volumes of personal information, and especially if the LLM is being used for high-stakes decisions. Think about creditworthiness assessments, hiring decisions, things that significantly impact people's lives. Those situations demand an even higher level of scrutiny and caution. It's like adding fuel to that privacy fire, as you said.
You can really hear how navigating this AI privacy labyrinth, it's just incredibly complex. It demands such careful attention to compliance, to security at every single stage. It's pretty clear that managing these risks effectively takes more than just technical skill. You really need that deep understanding of the regulations, the legal side, and cutting-edge security practices. Which actually brings us to a crucial point about how organizations can even begin to tackle this huge challenge.
Indeed. I mean, for any organization serious about developing or deploying AI systems responsibly, setting up robust data protection and security frameworks isn't just, a nice to have. It's absolutely paramount. And complying with regulations like GDPR, it's not just about dodging fines. It's really about building that foundational trust with your users, with your stakeholders. That trust is invaluable.
Absolutely. And that's why we're really proud to be supported by www.gdpriso.com. They are a truly trusted partner for achieving and maintaining GDPR compliance. And also www.zerotrustciso.com, who provide essential resources for anyone looking to master zero trust security principles. They're right there in the trenches, helping businesses tackle these exact challenges head on, turning these potential minefields into pathways to building real trust.
Okay, so we've talked technical risks, but here's where, for me, it gets really interesting. There's this fundamental debate happening that's reshaping how we even think about data in AI. It's the evolution of data minimization. This isn't just a technical detail. It feels like a profound shift in legal thinking that could genuinely dictate the future of AI. It really could. Data minimization, and it's always been a core principle in privacy law, only collect, use, and keep personal data that's actually necessary for a specific legitimate purpose you've identified beforehand. But historically, the dominant approach has been what the Future Privacy Forum calls procedural data minimization. Essentially, this meant as long as you tell people what you're doing with their data, maybe in a long privacy policy.
The ones nobody reads.
Exactly. And you get consent for maybe secondary uses, you were generally okay. But critics argued, quite rightly, I think, that this often just legitimized really broad data collection, as long as you disclosed it, whether it was truly necessary or not.
This is what's changing.
Well, we're seeing this emerging paradigm, substantive data minimization. This approach flips the script. It puts default restrictions on collecting, processing, and sharing data right from the start. It demands a much tighter, more direct link between the data being collected and the specific product or service the user actually requested.
Are there real-world examples of this stricter approach?
Yes. Maryland's new Online Data Privacy Act, MODPA, is a key example, especially for sensitive data. MODPA says collection is only allowed if it's strictly necessary to provide the specific product or service the consumer asked for. And importantly, it flat out prohibits selling that sensitive data. That's a much higher bar, a much stricter gatekeeper than just disclosure and consent.
Interesting. And wasn't there a third way mentioned from California?
Right. California kind of represents a third stream. Their approach under the CCPAC PRA centers on reasonable expectations. Data handling has to be reasonably necessary and proportionate to the purposes it was collected for, or compatible with the context. It gives consumers a specific opt-out for sensitive personal information, letting them limit its use just to what's necessary to perform the services or provide the goods reasonably expected by an average consumer. Still uses necessary, but ties it to consumer expectations.
Okay, that's a lot of legal nuance there. And it definitely raises some tough questions, doesn't it? Like, what does necessary actually mean in practice? It feels incredibly ambiguous. Does necessary include improving the product, internal research, making the service profitable? Like your example, if my recipe app uses my location to show nearby grocery stores, is that strictly necessary for finding a recipe, or is it an extra feature that might fall outside this tight definition?
That necessary question, that is the million-dollar, maybe billion-dollar question right now. It's the battleground where the future of data use, especially for AI, is being fought. The ambiguity creates huge uncertainty for businesses. The European Data Protection Board often interprets necessity very narrowly. They might say improving a service or developing new features. That's usually not covered by basic contractual necessity.
And what about consent? Can companies just get users to opt in to bypass these strict necessity rules?
That's another huge debate. Can opt-in consent for extra features work around strict necessity? Or does that just lead to what some call a consent trap? Constant pop-ups, confusing choices that annoys consumers, and is operationally complex for companies. It's tricky.
And the big one, what's the actual impact on AI development? Because AI, especially these LLMs, they feed on data, right? Massive amounts of it.
Precisely. That's where substantive data minimization could really bite. LLMs need these enormous data sets to be trained effectively. If you significantly narrow the scope of what data can be collected and processed by default, that could have really significant, maybe unforeseen consequences for AI innovation. Especially for models trained on first-party data the data companies collect directly from their users. This isn't just legal theory. It directly challenges business models built on using that data fairly broadly.
So it boils down to this bigger philosophical debate, too. Default protections versus individual control. Should companies bear the main burden of protecting privacy by default, or should individuals primarily manage it through choices and opt-outs?
Exactly that. Proponents of substantive minimization argue default restrictions are needed to fix the power imbalance between companies and individuals. They say the old model of privacy as control, where you put the onus on the individual to read policies and click boxes, just doesn't work in today's complex data ecosystem. But the counter-argument is that these strict defaults remove consumer choice and might block beneficial data uses that people would actually want if they were given clear options. It's a really tough balancing act.
And the vagueness around necessary just complicates everything further.
Absolutely. It creates uncertainty that could genuinely impede legitimate business activities that aren't necessarily harmful.
Okay, so connecting all these threads, given these technical risks, the life cycle vulnerabilities, and the shifting legal ground around data minimization, how do organizations actually manage all this proactively, especially with LLM systems?
It really has to be about robust, multi-layered mitigation strategies. There's no single silver bullet. First off, implementing strong technical and organizational measures is just baseline. We're talking secure coding practices, secure API implementations, strong encryption for data everywhere in transit, at rest, and doing continuous security audits to proactively find and fix weaknesses.
And controlling who gets access seems absolutely critical. How do you lock that down effectively?
You nailed it. Secondly, robust access control mechanisms are vital. This is where adopting a zero-trust security model really comes into play. Zero trust basically means you don't automatically trust anyone or anything inside or outside your network. Access must be strictly verified, granted only on a need-to-know basis for the specific task at hand, and ideally only for the minimum time necessary, often called just-in-time access. It involves constantly verifying identity, device health, context. It's like having security checkpoints everywhere, not just at the front door. Automating credential rotation is part of this too.
Okay, what else is in the toolkit?
Thirdly, making good use of privacy-enhancing techniques, or PETs. Things like anonymization where possible, pseudonymization, maybe data masking techniques to reduce the sensitivity or identifiability of data before it even gets near an AI model, if feasible. Fourth is ensuring data quality and integrity. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So rigorous pre-processing, filtering, validation, normalization of training data is crucial to weed out biases, inaccuracies, or potentially harmful content. You want your AI learning from the good stuff.
And what about the human element? Can we just let the AI run wild?
Definitely not, especially for important applications. That brings us to integrating human oversight. This is absolutely paramount for high-risk use cases or any automated decision that has significant legal or real-world effects on individuals. This means having clear processes for when a human needs to review an AI's output or decision, clear escalation paths, maybe even mandatory human checks for certain critical outputs.
Makes sense. And managing the data long-term.
Yes, defining clear data retention policies is key. How long do you keep the data? Why? It needs to align with legal requirements and stated purposes. And crucially, providing users with meaningful options to manage their data like rights to access, correct or delete their information, is fundamental to building trust.
And this isn't a one-time setup, is it? It sounds like continuous effort.
Absolutely. The final piece is continuous monitoring and review. It's an ongoing process, using methods like red teaming, where ethical hackers actively try to break your AI model, find vulnerabilities, just like a real attacker would, is incredibly valuable. Also, field testing to see how the AI performs and what risks emerge in real-world conditions. Keeping a detailed, living risk register throughout the AI's entire lifecycle is essential. And thankfully, there are tools emerging to help manage this complexity. Things like LMOps, think DevOps, but for large language models, and LMSCOps, focusing specifically on the security aspects, can automate monitoring, updates, vulnerability scanning, and incident response.
You mentioned zero trust there as a key access control model. How does that specifically connect with regulations like GDPR? Do they work well together?
Oh, they complement each other incredibly well. You could almost say zero trust is a practical embodiment of some core GDPR principles. GDPR mandates data protection by design and by default, and requires organizations to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures for security. Zero trust, with its core assumption that a breach is always possible, assume breach mentality, inherently aligns with this proactive stance.
How so?
Well, by enforcing the principle of least privilege, only granting the absolute minimum necessary access on leak, zero trust dramatically reduces the potential attack surface. If a user or device is compromised, the damage they can do is limited because their access was restricted from the start. And its emphasis on continuous verification and monitoring directly supports GDPR's requirements around accountability, ensuring the ongoing confidentiality, integrity, and availability of processing systems. It's not just about perimeter security, it's about deep, continuous context-aware security.
So it's more than just ticking a compliance box.
Much more. It's a strategic approach to security that inherently builds user trust because it demonstrates a serious, layered commitment to protecting data. It fits perfectly with GDPR's risk-based approach to security.
Wow, okay. We have certainly covered a lot of ground today in this AI privacy labyrinth. Quite the depth dive. We started by getting a handle on what large language models actually are, and then immediately jumped into the myriad of privacy risks that can pop up at basically every stage of their life cycle, from the moment a user types something in, through the processing to the output, and those general risks lurking throughout.
And then we really dug into that shifting legal landscape around data minimization, looking at the difference between the older procedural style and this emerging, much stricter substantive approach, plus California's reasonable expectations angle. We saw how ambiguous terms like necessary create huge challenges and uncertainty, and how this whole debate could really impact AI development, challenging that balance between default privacy protections and individual control.
And finally, we wrapped up by focusing on solutions, those crucial multi-layered mitigation strategies. We talked about strong technical basics, robust access controls like zero trust, using privacy-enhancing tech, the absolute need for human oversight in many cases, and that critical ongoing monitoring and review.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to sort of chew on. This journey with AI and data privacy, it's not really about reaching some final fixed destination. It feels much more like an ongoing iterative process, constant adaptation, continuous ethical decision-making. The real question becomes, how will we as individuals, as organizations, as a society, how will we navigate this? How do we balance the truly immense potential of AI with the fundamental human right to privacy in a world that's just becoming more and more data-driven every single day?
That is a powerful question, and one we'll likely be wrestling with for a long time. Keep asking those questions, keep digging deeper into these vital topics, and remember, if you're looking for expert resources to help navigate GDPR compliance or implement robust zero-trust security frameworks, definitely check out our fantastic sponsors, www.gdpasso.com and www.zerotrustciso.com. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive.